You're watching Outsider's Guide to Everything in the Known Universe with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow, and with myself, Rowan Dean. Week by week, we go through all the topics and dissect them in great detail. Today, how about the Outsider's Guide to the Art of Wearing a Mask? Yes, they're all the rage now, particularly in Victoria, but all around the country now. Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? How do you wear a mask? All sorts of comical stuff with people trying to fiddle on. I put one on the other day, it snapped and went flying off. So I still have not yet mastered the art of wearing a mask, but maybe I need to pretty quickly. Rita Panahi, got your mask on down in Melbourne, have you?
Well, one of the very few exceptions for wearing a mask in Melbourne is broadcasting, because that's been declared an exception, because people who are hearing impaired quite often read lips, and that's been for that reason. Your newsreaders and the reporters you see reporting from different areas across the state haven't been wearing masks, but everyone else is. It is quite surreal now to walk around, and just about everybody, unless you are cycling or jogging, you're allowed to take them off, but everybody else is. And there's this really, I don't know, this censorious, scolding kind of climate, because we've had the Chief Health Officer say, have some compassion for people who are not wearing a mask, because you don't know their story. They may have breathing difficulties. There might be a medical reason for why they're out without a mask. But all I'm seeing is just, particularly online and from people who should know better, this abuse of anybody who's without a mask, without any investigation of, or perhaps they actually have a medical reason for not wearing it, and that is a valid reason to not be wearing them. So it's turned people against each other, and it's been quite interesting to observe. I'm certainly all for wearing masks when you're inside, because they're very effective, as we know, when you can't socially distance. But when you're out going for a walk in the park and there's nobody else around and it's just you and you want to get some fresh air, then I'm questioning the merits of a mask. But it's a hard and fast rule for everybody, anywhere outside the house, indoors or outdoors at the moment in Victoria. And New South Wales, you could be copping it next.
I'm not sure we will, but we shall see, Rita. We shall definitely see. It might become mandatory any day now. But if so, James, what is there an etiquette to wearing a mask? Can you wear a mask stylishly? Can you wear a mask and still look like the dapper man about town that you always are, James Morrow?
Well, this is a really interesting question, so I've actually inquired with some Venetian fabricators. I'd like to get a proper Venetian plague mask, with the big nose and the goggles and everything, because I figure that will enforce some pretty good social distancing should this ever come down to it in New South Wales and here in Sydney, where I am. But, the thing that I find really fascinating about this, both Rowan and Rita, is that this whole mask thing, this whole mask issue, has brought out the absolute worst in so many people on all sides. And I'll tell you what, look, there are probably plenty of circumstances where masks make a limited amount of sense, when you're indoors with other people, and, that's fine if they want to mandate that and say you have to have that in the shops or whatever. But it seems to be bringing out the worst on both sides, both those who are the mask refusers and those are the people who are, pushing and saying everybody needs to wear one. If I see one more celebrity, out in the park with their phone going, like this, and taking a selfie, with their mask in the middle of nowhere, saying, #wear a mask, #save lives. It's like, come on, stop it. But I was reading a story in the New York Post before I came on air with this, and in America, a woman who was refusing to wear a mask on a flight was kicked off, which is fine because that's airline rules. But, so she was acting like a jerk and got kicked off the flight, but then the entire flight went into this puritanical 2-minute hate frenzy, screaming, yelling, abusing her as she was escorted off the flight, as if they thought, yes, we are so virtuous, and because we're so virtuous wearing our masks, we can now go and act really, really awfully to this other person who we don't know, we've never met before, we don't know her story. And it's almost like we've got a physical manifestation of that mask we put on the internet, or that anonymity that so many people take on the internet, which allows them to then go and just abuse people. So, yes, if they're medically necessary in some circumstances, absolutely right, go for it. But I worry so much about both the censoriousness and the misplaced libertarianism that we're seeing on both sides of this debate.
Absolutely. And I think a key thing here is, we often talk about identity politics and identities, but the horrific thing that put the medical issue to one side, and we can talk about that in a second, but what it does in erasing a person's identity, erasing communal bonds between friends and neighbours. I mean, normally we're walking down the street, you might nod to someone, you might smile, say hello, that sort of thing. It literally takes us into this zombie world, which we certainly on this show and many others have criticised as the worst thing about the veil in Islam, is this process of stripping away a person's identity, turning them into an automaton rather than an individual, removing the ability for self-expression, removing putting people in an anonymous position, which can either be good or bad for that person. And all of those factors come into play very heavily with this, particularly when it's mandated. And I have a real problem, Rita and James, with mandating this. I don't have any problem whatsoever with health guidelines, government saying, look, you really should wear a mask, and people having the choice and saying, yep, I've listened, I'm educated, I realise that it's the right thing to do, I've looked at the data, I've looked at the medical opinions, and yes, I'm going to do it voluntarily. The moment it becomes mandated, I think it takes on a much broader and more dangerous role than simply the protecting of a few droplets of potentially coronavirus, Rita.
Look, I don't completely agree with that. I just think if there is a medical imperative for it, then it makes sense to mandate it. We're not proposing this for years to come.
But we don't mandate cigarettes. We do mandate seatbelts, but we don't mandate all sorts of other things.
But yeah, the seatbelt comparison one is the one that's been made. The also comparison with imposing speed limits and all sorts of other public safety measures that are mandated. And I think it actually, if you strongly recommended it but didn't mandate it, it has the risk of turning people even more against each other, and those who don't wear the mask would be, I think, attacked even more. I mean, to be a few more of them to attack, I guess. What the problem I have with it isn't so much the fact that it's been mandated, it's just the indiscriminate nature of it. The fact that it doesn't matter if you're in a crowded shopping centre or a supermarket where, it makes sense to be wearing a mask because it's almost impossible to socially distance from others, to if you are walking on the beach by yourself, even if you're out in the middle of Port Phillip Bay in a boat, you're supposed to have the mask on unless you're exercising and walking, and most exercises doesn't fit the category, but if you're doing strenuous exercise, you can be without a mask. But in all other circumstances, you're supposed to wear the mask. And I think that is illogical. And we've seen throughout this pandemic, when you have illogical restrictions or illogical mandates, it shakes the public's faith in what you're doing, and that's what I
absolutely and rightly so. If it's not logical, and it's not enforceable, it's insane. And this is the problem with mandating. Whereas education would have people wearing it in the right places. Most people, as most people do abide by most kind of civil recommendations or public health recommendations. James?
Rowan, I think there's another point to that too. Like one of the things that I find, unfortunate about what's happening in Victoria right now, and which may happen in New South Wales, is this idea that the police are going around handing out tickets. And, there's tickets for $200 in Melbourne to people who may not be able to afford that. They may be young, they may be disadvantaged. Why aren't the cops, instead of handing out tickets, handing out masks if these things are so important?
Exactly.
And I'm quite serious about this.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
If this is the public health emergency that they say it is, and there's no reason to think it's not, I'm not being a virus denier or a conspiracist or anything like that, but why aren't they doing more to publicly provide the things that they say people need to either stay alive or keep other people alive? That's the first point. But the other
That's
point
a brilliant point, James. And you might also say if you find them $1,000, they then won't be able to afford to buy any masks.
Well, exactly.
After that.
But isn't this also a big failure of how, the reason why people are having so many debates about this is because the public health industry has squandered so much trust. For years they have been wasting our time with, dietary guidelines that go this way and that. Oh, don't eat meat. Oh, wait, no, it's a meat diet that'll get you the pounds to fall off. Oh, you can only have 3 drinks a week. Oh, no, you can have 2 a day. Oh, no, red wine is healthy. No, it's not. And doing all of these things to bother us and nanny us in our day-to-day lives to the point where we just simply ignore them because we figure they don't know what they're talking about, instead of building that trust for when it's emergency, when we actually need their advice and should be following it.
Agree, Rita?
But when it comes to masks, they've been all over the shop. I mean, the other things take months, years for them to move to high carbs are great, to high carbs are murder, to, all the different health advices. We were told initially you should not be using masks if you're healthy. In fact, it can be counterproductive because you keep touching your face and your eyes. And I remember Dan Andrews giving advice just a couple of months ago saying don't wear masks unless you're sick, as if you would be stupid to consider doing otherwise. And then we've had this 180. But the crazy thing in Victoria is it was only a week before everybody had to wear a mask just to leave the house. Nobody in nursing homes, aged care facilities, was wearing masks. The staff working there, it wasn't mandated that they wear masks. And again, you think, how can that be? You would have thought that would be done from day one. They're dealing with the most at-risk population imaginable, and yet they only started wearing masks a week before the general public did, just to leave their house. I mean, this just shows you the advice we've had throughout this pandemic, sadly, hasn't been the best. And no wonder people are questioning aspects of that advice.
Well, if we were to do a outsider's guide to the failings of the Andrews government, we'd need more than 30 minutes, I've got to tell you. And we'll save that for another day for outsiders. But I think you hit on a critical point there as well, that, if there is a negative aspect to wearing masks, and there are some authorities who've said, yes, that it can be counterproductive and may have medical issues, then what happens when you mandate it and you're forcing people to do something which may later turn out to possibly not have been so great for their health in certain circumstances? And this is the problem that we're faced with once we get into this sort of authoritarian world we're in, where we've seen too many government decisions backfiring. We shall see what happens with the masks. Maybe next week we'll all be wearing one, even Rita, James and myself, who knows? That's it for Outsider's Guide to the Art of Wearing a Mask.